fresh out the box.
Fresh California plums.
Hello and welcome to a sort of bonus episode of Fresh Film Fridays, the podcast where two dudes normally pick the newest films that are streaming or in theaters and discuss them, but today we're doing something so off the walls it's insane. Today we are talking about Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives, which was directed by Tom McLaughlin. And today I am actually joined by Joe Testa, who you all know from Wheel of Horror. He's our horror expert. So welcome back, Joe.
Thank you very much, Alec. Happy Friday the 13th.
Yes, happy Friday the 13th. And just really quick, just want to say... All right. So, that did not go as planned. I want to say, like, Joe's back. He's back. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here. And yes, I wanted to talk about Alice Cooper because he has 3 songs in this movie. One of them, the kind of title track, He's Back, The Man Behind the Mask. I saw the Coop this past fall in concert, and he did indeed perform that song. I was super excited. And there was an actor playing Jason walking around stage with a machete. It was fantastic.
Really? At the show you went to, they were?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh my God, that's so crazy that even nowadays they're still doing that.
Yeah, I think this movie, and I think it's kind of the popularity of this movie is kind of has grown over the years and kind of continues to grow. And I think it's helped with some of these Alice Cooper songs that he's, dusted off and now performs in concert.
I love that. Yeah, I know they made a music video, for this film that was promotional that had Jason and Alice Cooper, but so cool that you got to see that and they're still, to this day, I mean, almost 40 years later, still doing that in concert.
Absolutely. The other 2 songs are not Feed My Frankenstein. That's from Wayne's World, but
right.
Teenage Frankenstein, which is an awesome track. And the other song is Hard Rock Summer during the chase scene.
Yes, I did. I love that song. It didn't feel like it really fit in a horror film, but I still loved it. A lot of hair metal in this.
Yeah, we'll talk about it. There might be a few things that don't seem to quite fit, but we can get into it.
Yeah, so the whole reason that we're doing this, Joe came up with a great idea. It's like, hey, it's Friday the 13th. We obviously at some point want to cover all of the Friday the 13th films on Wheel of Horror. And this is considered, if not the best, within the top 3 for sure of the Friday the 13th movies. And it's part 6, which is kind of crazy. Usually it's, the first ones. Would you agree with that? Or would you, how does this fit into your hierarchy of the Friday the 13th films?
So yeah, this is, I recommended we cover this movie because it is my favorite Jason movie.
Okay.
I know you guys have a soft spot for part 7. I was on that episode way back when. But yeah, I've always kind of gone back and forth between this one and part 4. I think that's kind of common for a lot of Friday fans. But in recent years especially, I feel like this one has really pulled ahead. And I go back to this one quite a bit. It might even have been, and it's hard to say because I feel like the Friday movies have been a part of me since my inception.
Yeah.
But it might have been the first one I saw. And I feel like it's a pretty good one to start off with, especially for a kid.
Oh, big time. Because it's like, he's back. Jason lives. Like, this is the beginning of zombie Jason. So it is kind of like a very left turn in the entire series. I mean, it really is. He was just a normal, well, not normal, but he was just like a human, I guess, until the end of part 4. And now he's a zombie.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, do you have a preference between kind of the mountain man Jason of 2, 3, and 4 or the zombie hulking Jason we get now?
I mean, the only thing that is a little bit more appealing about the 2, 3, 4 Jason is he can be killed. He's still very imposing. He seems a lot faster, it seems like in 2, 3, and 4. He's like a man running. In this one, he kind of just seems like, hey, I'm unstoppable, so I'm going to take my time in the later ones. What about you?
Yeah, it's tough. I think 2, 3, and 4 is probably a better trilogy than 6, 7, 8. I think those might be the better movies, but I don't know. It might be just kind of nostalgia, but the big Kane Hodder Jason that, especially in part 7, I talked about how much I love his look with his bones showing and the chain around his neck. It's very mythic Jason. It's Jason force of nature Jason. I don't know. There's just something about that version that really appeals to me. The, the black eyes, you can't see his eyes under the mask. I don't know. There's something about the later part of the series, Jason, that really appeals to me. And I almost wish they ever do clear up all this legal trouble, that if we get another movie, it is something like that. I don't know. I mean, the other, versions of Jason are cool too, but there's other mountain men. There's other kind of backwoods deformed guys in masks, like Wrong Turn or The Hills Have Eyes. But, Jason in 678, that is very specifically Jason, if that makes sense.
No, it definitely does. And it's funny that you said, like, it's almost like Mother Nature brought him back to life, like with the electricity. I mean, it seems like whenever there's a storm or whenever Mother Nature's acting up, that's when Jason really goes nuts. And it is kind of like crazy to think his mother, she's dead. Now Mother Nature resurrects him to come back and get revenge.
I like it.
I don't know. It's also just crazy that he came back from a lightning bolt in a fence post.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're getting into something that I really do enjoy about this movie, and that's the kind of gothic classic monsters feel that this movie has right from the get-go. I mean, as soon as this movie begins, it's like the fog rolling over Crystal Lake and full moon and graveyards. And, the director, Tom McLaughlin, he grew up a monster kid, Universal Monsters, and you definitely see that influence on this movie.
Well, you were just on our Ed Wood episode too, and the scene where Jason comes up with his arms up, it looks just like the guy raising from Plan 9 from Outer Space.
Oh yes, Tor Johnson, good call.
Yeah.
I like that, absolutely. And I've been rewatching, like most people during quarantine, rewatching so many movies, and I went back and watched some of the older Lon Chaney Jr. Mummy movies, and that reminded me so much of this movie, just the way he moves and the way Jason moves. And there's a shot of him, walking by moonlight, and his shadow is cast over one of his victims. This movie just constantly reminds me of those classic horror movies.
Yeah, and it did seem like it had like a hodgepodge of just all culture too, because like with the James Bond opening, like that little like.
Yes, and that's how I was reminded how young I saw this movie, because like these movies were always on TV, and I remember I was watching this with my grandfather, and he was the one who pointed out to me that was a James Bond reference. I hadn't seen any James Bond movies at that point, but this movie, I mentioned in our Scream podcast that Scream gets a lot of the credit for being self-aware and kind of poking fun at the horror genre, but I think I even mentioned that this movie kind of was doing something like that way back in the 80s, and there's a lot of little references, like they reference Carpenter County, obviously a reference to John Carpenter, and Karloff's General Store, getting back to Frankenstein. So yeah, there's a lot of fun little Easter eggs in this movie.
Well, dude, there was another thing I heard. I watched a video on YouTube too. They were like, he's down on Cunningham Road, like Sean S. Cunningham. And then the other things, dude, this movie is so meta and like self-referential. I mean, the old grave digger guy looks at the camera and talks, and what was the girl in the beginning where she's like, I've seen enough horror movies to know that masked men are creepy in the woods, get away, like stuff like that.
Yeah. It's funny, like, this is a pretty drastic shift in tone from the previous 5 Friday movies. I can understand if you're a fan of the kind of gritty grindhouse tone of those first 5 movies, that this one may be a bit too cheeky, and maybe a bit too polished. For me, it's not, even though I love those first Friday movies, almost as much. This one, I feel like it walks a really fine line of being, it's funny. It seems like it's something almost specifically exclusive to the 80s, where we had these great horror movies, but they were also great comedies, like American Werewolf in London or Fright Night or Lost Boys. Like, I feel like this fits in really well with those.
You're right. We never get those really anymore. I mean, they have that new Dave Grohl movie, which I haven't seen, which is kind of like a comedy horror movie.
Yes, yeah, I did see the trailer to that. I mean, I could you might be able to say Scream could fit in that if we're talking the 90s, but I feel like the 80s had so many of those, and
Yeah.
then in the 90s and in other decades, the mixture in the cocktail was not quite right.
You're absolutely right, though. I mean, I'm even thinking like Ghostbusters, Monster
Mhm.
Squad, Gremlins. I
Yeah.
mean, they all are a nice blend of both.
Yeah, the list goes on and on. The Howling, I feel. You said Gremlins, didn't you?
But yeah, but that's the thing. I mean, they're creepy monsters with a very just a horror. It is a horror movie, but it's got comedic undertones, which just make it. I don't know. We've always talked about how horror and comedy just go hand in hand. It's like chocolate and peanut butter. It's just great combo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're right. This one definitely does feel a little bit more like Hollywood, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But I would imagine that they had to do that because people were pissed off about the fifth one where they're like, where the hell is Jason? Like, seriously, what is this? And then they bring him back. So like, we got to go like huge for this one. I think it at the time, I think had the highest budget of any of them.
That makes sense. Yeah. I mean, I think this was kind of a course correction for the people who felt disappointed by part 5. And part 5, for all its faults, is actually a really, really entertaining movie. That's actually the one that me and my friends probably rewatched the most because it is just so over the top and ridiculous and sleazy. I mean, that is like a straight up grindhouse movie. We might have to pencil that in, sometime soon.
Well, it's a guessing. It's a murder mystery kind of because you're like, wait, I thought Jason was dead. And then like the whole movie, you're like, wait, who? And then the ending, you're like, who the hell's this guy?
Yeah. But yeah, this one, you can tell they definitely spent a little more cash on it. And there's a lot of, set pieces and different locations. I feel like most of the Friday movies, for the most part, take place in just like a couple of cabins, and on the lake. And this one we get, a little town square and the sheriff's office, and we get a car chase and a great graveyard scene. I mean, they definitely put all the money on the screen.
Yeah, I mean, this one, there's one thing that really stood out to me is there's kids in this one. And there's really not, I don't think there's ever been kids in any other ones. Not that I can remember.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. Yeah, this is the first one that actually has campers at the camp.
I also think that like these characters are pretty well developed. I mean, Tommy, obviously this is like his third movie, so we're like starting to really get to know him. But the sheriff, man, I loved the sheriff. I thought he was like badass, but funny, but like kind of right most of the time. But I don't know. I just enjoyed the depth of his character compared to other Friday the 13th movies where it just seemed like characters were just kind of like, they're just here to get killed.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'd say across the board, it's a pretty entertaining group of like victims, and the sheriff, that could have been a completely one-note asshole character, but I really enjoy him. And Tommy, this is my favorite of the 3 Tommies. Have you seen Return of the Living Dead?
No, but I know that the actor is in that.
Yeah. So Tom Matthews, another great example of 80s horror comedies, by the way. But yeah, Tom Matthews, I think there's just something really just kind of likable about him. And even though the guy's a complete idiot, I mean, if you think about it, he's responsible for everything that happens, from here on. Jason was dead in his grave until Tommy dug him up. So
right.
There is that.
Well, I wanted to ask you about the timeline a little bit though, because resurrection.
Oh no.
Well, I know. You there was one episode where you wanted to bring it up, and Eric's like, no, like we don't have time for that. But I am kind of curious because this one takes place 1 year after A New Beginning.
Mm-hmm.
But how many years after Jason's actually dead does this take place?
Yeah. So how many years after part 4? I mean,
today's episode of Wheel of Horror is brought to you by Bard's Clothing. Remember that one time you bought a Cool Cat shirt, and now you get bombarded with calls and ads for Cool Cat shirts? Well, at Bard's Clothing, the focus is on you and your story. A custom clothing company producing casual knits, button-down shirts, suits, and much more. All of Bard's Clothing garments are created right here in America, so you don't have to worry about slave labor or killing the environment. Buying with intention to tell your story has never been easier. Go to bardsclothing.com to book an appointment, and be sure to follow them at bardsclothing on Instagram.
You just, I think, have to accept that the Friday movies take place in this alternate reality where it's always the 1980s. It's really strange. Yeah, I mean, let me ask you this. They changed the name of Crystal Lake in this movie to Forest Green,
Mm-hmm.
which I thought was kind of interesting. You know, I would imagine the massacres have not, helped the Crystal Lake economy. So they've, renamed it. But all the kids seem to act like Jason is an urban legend, which is really weird because if Tommy was a kid the last time he killed people, most of the people in this movie, they would have been alive. They would have remembered it.
Yeah.
So it's just the kind of thing you can't think too much about,
That was one of the things I was thinking about. I was just like, everybody's acting like this happened like 30 years ago or something like that.
Right.
It's like, nobody remembers it except for our parents. It's like, no, you guys were all like maybe in middle school when this happened, or
Yeah, I would imagine, and the events of 2, 3, and 4 all happened within like a weekend or a week of each other.
mm-hmm.
So, that would be a pretty big story.
Yeah.
And I would imagine it wouldn't have happened more than 10 years before this.
Okay. Because Jason's body does not look like it's been rotting for that long. He still has hair. Apparently his eyeballs are still there. I'm looking into it too much.
It's funny. When they first open the coffin, he looks like a mummy. I mean,
Mhm.
he's completely shriveled. And then when he rises out of the coffin, he's like 250 pounds. So
Yeah. And he's got eyeballs, and I don't know. I just was like, wow, that lightning really, that's good that it can fully bring everything back. But
yeah, and it's funny, the Forest Green thing never comes back either. Once we get to part 7, it's back to being called Crystal Lake. So,
God.
I mean, it's funny. Yeah, again, you can't think too much about these things, but I was thinking about this series. I mean, the first 8 movies anyway had 7 different directors and God knows how many writers.
Mhm.
And there are a lot of inconsistencies, but there is this surprising amount of tonal consistency in the 8 Friday movies. I mean, a lot of things don't make sense, but I don't know, they all have the same kind of feel. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, they not in a good way, but they sometimes blend together where you're like, what part was that even from? Because they're all
Right.
kind of the same.
Yeah, pretty much.
Another thing that I wanted to ask you, which I brought up when we did part 7, did you notice in this one, the music also sounds like in The Shining?
I didn't notice that, but I actually saw a YouTube video that pointed that out, and now I don't think I could ever unhear it. It's like
Yeah.
it sounds like kind of a sped up version of that great Shining theme.
Yeah, well, the intro of The Shining is just like dun 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 dun,
Right.
and this sounds just like that, but it's also in part 7, and I think it started in this one. I think that's where they started kind of like introducing that thing.
I never noticed that before, but yeah, that is exactly it.
Anyways, because I remember I brought it up last time. I was like, oh man, I wonder if it ruined it for him, but not my intentions. I also think this one, it's like the actual funniest. Like the lines where the paintball crew or whatever, like, and they're having that whole like, you turn into a whole different person when you're out here. Like that seems so real in a way.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you go watch some of the conversations in part 5, I would, this is just a drastic improvement in just all areas of craft. But I always feel like the best Jason movies, to me, part 4 and part 6, they would still be good movies even if Jason didn't show up. Like part 4 would still be kind of like a funny sex comedy about, guys trying to get laid in the woods,
Yeah.
and this one, would be an entertaining 80s comedy about like a girl who's, got this hard ass sheriff for a father, and, she's got a crush on a bad boy or something. Like it writes itself, whereas
Yeah.
I feel like some of the lesser Fridays, I mean, they're just about body count, and they would be nothing if Jason didn't show up. You know what I mean?
Yeah. See, it's weird because after this one, they do just kind of go right back to form. I mean, part 7 is pretty much just like, all right, new people to kill, let's just massacre them or whatever. I wonder, is it, I know this one did not do very well at the box
Right.
office. So I think they're probably like, all right, people just want what we've already been doing. So like they want Jason back and they just want stupid teens getting killed.
Yeah, I think after part 3, the box office started to steadily decline. And I think they were still making money because these movies were pretty cheap to make.
Right.
But you can tell in part 7, there is a noticeable kind of, the purse strings, I feel like, tightened a bit. Again, we go back to really just 2 locations in that movie. You got the 2 cabins.
Yeah.
Where this movie feels like it takes place in a whole town. Yeah, I can definitely see that. I feel like going back to our part 7 discussion, I feel like part 7, the big draw for that movie, besides the idea that it was Carrie versus Jason, was that it was going to showcase some really fantastic special effects, like some
Right.
really great gore effects, because that's the world that director came from. But unfortunately, that movie got like massacred by the MPAA, and this one had its share of trims too. I mean, they all did, but I think this movie actually finds clever ways around it, like through clever editing. Like when the sheriff dies, when he gets his back broken, like
Yeah.
there's no gore. Like they just did a trick where they buried one guy, and his legs were sticking out, and then like the sheriff laid on top of that guy, and it looks like he got broken in half. So there was no gore. It was just kind of clever movie magic. And there was another scene where like Jason twists a girl's head all the way around. And again, I think it was just kind of like clever editing, no gore. So I feel like this movie, they found ways to work around those limitations.
Yeah, I heard this is the only one with no nudity, and there's very little gore. You're 100% right. Even the stab where they cut all those people's heads off, like that was pretty tame too.
Yeah, yeah. And again, those things were trimmed. There were quite a few trims. But yeah, that's true. This one is the only one without any nudity. I mean, I could see if someone was a really big fan of those first 5 movies, which again, I am, I could see some pushback against this one, that it doesn't quite feel like the same series. But
Yeah.
there's just something very just fun and charming about this one. Like that also feels kind of exclusive to the 80s, is this feeling, this kind of genre where just kids know something that the adults don't know, and they're just kind of on their own to figure it out. You know what I mean? I mean, like Goonies or even Nightmare on Elm Street to some extent is kind of like that. And with this movie, like boom, right from the get-go, Tommy knows, Jason is on the loose and he has to do something about it, as opposed to most Jason movies where nobody knows Jason is on the loose until like the last 10 minutes. Everyone else has been killed.
Yeah, you're right. Jason's like does not hide at all this movie.
Yeah.
He is you have no you're like, I know exactly who the killer is. There's no question about it. Yeah, no, you're totally right, because Tommy, even the girl, Megan, where she steals the car and then she goes off with them on the whole little mission. So yeah, you're right, everyone's aware.
Yeah, and it just makes him feel like, even though he's responsible for it, it just makes him feel like, an active character. Like there's a scene where he goes and gets some books about like how to destroy Jason. He gets some books on like the occult.
Right.
And, it's just an interesting, this is part 6, and these movies were coming out in consecutive years at this point. So this was the 6th Friday movie in 6 years. So I think you needed to freshen things up at this point and switch up the formula. And I think this movie does a really good job of that.
Well, let me ask you then, why get rid of Tommy Jarvis and Megan? Like, why end their story with no conclusion?
Yeah. You mean bring them back for part 7?
I mean, yeah, because bring him back and kill him, because they're Tommy Jarvis has been basically the lead for the past 3 movies, and then the 7th one comes out and it's just like, he's totally gone.
Right.
We're done.
Yeah, it is strange. It is strange that he is in 3 movies and then just lives with no explanation, never to be heard from again. That is kind of weird.
He's the Laurie Strode, the Nancy of the Nightmare on Elm Street. I mean, he's the only character we can really grasp onto aside from the killer.
Yeah, totally. And I had heard rumors that the Creighton Duke character in Jason Goes to Hell was at one point going to be Tommy Jarvis, but they like didn't have, because that was a New Line movie. They didn't have rights to all the characters. I have no idea if that's true or not. But yeah, it is weird that this is where Tommy's story ends.
Officially, they did do that fan movie. Did you hear about that?
Yes, I've actually watched. There's two of them that Tom Matthews is actually in.
Oh,
I mean, spoiler alert, because I didn't know this going in. They're called Never Hike Alone, I believe, and Tom Matthews shows up at the end of the first one, and it was quite a surprise. And being such a big fan of this movie, I was very pleasantly surprised.
yeah, and I thought I saw Never Hike Alone. I saw whichever one is like a found footage where it's a guy in the snow and he's like looking for somebody. I've seen that one.
I think the second one is in the snow.
Okay.
And I think we talked about in our Friday 7 episode how that's like the big thing that everyone wants to see. Like if they ever make another Jason movie, it should take place on like a frozen crystal lake.
Right.
So it's cool that this filmmaker, is kind of doing what Hollywood isn't right now.
Yeah.
And they're actually surprisingly very good quality. I'm not usually the biggest fan of fan films, but these are surprisingly polished.
Well, it also had the cop who points the laser gun. He comes back
Yes.
too. That same actor. So I'm like, that's
Yes.
really cool.
Officer Cologne. So he's only in the second one. If you saw him, you saw the second movie.
Okay. All right. Yeah, it's all starting to blend together just like the series kind of. I had another question for you though. So continuity. So in part 3, he gets the axe in the head, which causes that, dent in the side of his mask. And then the mask that obviously in part 5 is not the one that Jason wears normally. But in part 6, he has the dash again. So did Tommy save his mask? You know what I mean?
Yes. So at the end of part 4, Tommy, whacks Jason in the face with the machete, and the mask goes flying into Tommy's house. So it is reasonable to think that Tommy held on to that. He is like a mask collector. Like if you go back to that 4th movie when he's played by Corey Feldman, that's his thing. He makes masks.
Right.
He collects masks. I think it's pretty reasonable to think he held on to that, and the mask he has at the beginning of this movie is Jason's original mask.
Wow. Still with the dash. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. See, that's the funny thing. Like, there's so many continuity issues in this series, but somehow that crack in his mask from part 3, they remembered to keep that.
Yeah. Yeah. Dates are just thrown out, like where the state is. It doesn't matter. But like that crack. So help me God.
That we need.
Yeah. I love that. Coolest thing I think I've ever seen in any of these movies is that RV crash. That is like unbelievable how they got that in 1987 or whenever when this movie came out.
Yeah. And another example of the ambition of this movie. I mean, there's really nothing like that, in most of this series. I mean,
No.
That's really impressive. And the whole sequence too. And it's 2 more kills that they, managed to shoot without gore, really. But I think they're both pretty effective. There's the girl that gets her head crushed into the wall of the RV, and then Court, who actually is John Travolta's nephew.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, I think when you see this guy, it's like, oh, of course he is. But yeah, Court gets a hunting knife through his head, and yeah, there's no gore, but I think it's a fun scene. You got teenage Frankenstein blasting, and then this awesome car wreck.
Yeah, dude, seriously, that's like one of it's like up there with the fugitive train crash scene. Like, I'm like, how did they get that? Like, so good. I really wish there was a scene where Jason goes back to his hut and sees like, that maybe his mom's head's gone or something like that. And that's what just drives him insane or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah. It's funny. We never go back to that, or, the head. I mean, I guess it was maybe taken into police evidence. It's funny. I've had Friday the 13th on my brain lately, and I was thinking about Jason Goes to Hell, and you want to talk about continuity issues, because in that movie there's like the Voorhees mansion, which is really weird, that just gets introduced in that movie, and there's so much that gets introduced in that movie that it's like
The Necronomicon.
exactly. Maybe, you know what, maybe we should just do an episode on that movie, because there's a lot to talk about. But yeah, I mean, Jason is just kind of, he's got one thing on his mind in this movie. You know, it's like, yeah, he's not thinking about mommy or anything. He's just racking up a body count.
Yeah. I'd also heard that the ending, there was an ending that Tom McLaughlin wrote, which is kind of cool that he wrote and directed this, which I like that. But he wanted to have Mr. Voorhees at the end. Did you hear about this?
Yes, I did. And apparently it still exists in the like the paperback version. When when movies used to come out, a lot of them used to have these novelizations. And I would love to get my hands on that. I actually have a couple of the Friday novelizations, but not part 6. But yeah, apparently in his original draft, the gravedigger doesn't die. That was done in reshoots to up the body count. So apparently in the original script, there's this mysterious man standing over Jason's body. Not his body, actually, his grave, I think. And there's some kind of transaction that happens between him and the gravedigger. And it's implied that the gravedigger has sort of been keeping an eye on Jason's grave. I'm making sure nothing happens to it, because in Friday 5, they say that Jason was cremated. So in this one, apparently that was going to, I think, explain that somehow Jason's mysterious father has been hiding in the shadows, but kind of playing some kind of part that we never, were never privy to, because the producers didn't really want to follow that up. They felt that Jason was really the star of the show. And it kind of reminds me of what they did in Halloween 5. They introduced this mysterious man, and then they had to explain that in Halloween 6. So they probably just didn't want to deal with that.
That's exactly what I was thinking. I was like, then they're gonna have to introduce like a cult, and like, Mr. Voorhees is this leader of some like resurrection demon thing. It's like, okay. But they kind of do that in part 9. I mean, you do find out that he is like a shape-shifting demon thing. So I don't know.
Yeah, and I wish part 9 went deeper into these things, because the Necronomicon, it feels just like it's a kind of a horror Easter egg. I would have loved for them to explore like the idea that, maybe Mrs. Voorhees was screwing around with black magic, and that's why Jason is able to do the things he does. But they never really dive into any of these things, and you end up just having more questions after you watch that movie than answers.
Oh man, what if we find out Jason is the Jersey Devil? Right? Like that urban legend.
I already like it. I already like it more than I liked Jason Goes to Hell.
Yeah. Oh my God.
But you know what? In fairness to Jason Goes to Hell, I still have some love for that movie. Like I said to you earlier, many of these movies came out on my birthday, and I saw Jason Goes to Hell on my 12th birthday in theaters.
Did your grandpa bring you that one too, or how'd you get to see that one?
He was there, yes. I actually dragged my mom to that one too, I believe, and my sister. It was like a family outing. Everyone had to do what I wanted because it was my birthday, so that's what I chose.
Well, dude, it's so cool. You were born the day that Friday the 13th Part 3 came out, right? That's like,
yes,
yeah,
August 8th. You know what? I'm not going to get into the year. People could do the math.
Dude, but that's so cool. Like you were supposed to be a horror fan, Joe.
I guess so. It just worked out that way.
Yeah. Well, do you have any last minute thoughts on Jason Lives?
Really fun movie. If you haven't watched it, this has probably been a really strange conversation, but check it out if you haven't. Rewatch it if you haven't seen it in a while. It's a lot of fun, and yeah, it has climbed the ranks and now sits at the very top. But what about you? Do you have kind of a ranking for the Jason movies?
I mean, I know 7 isn't like the best. It's just kind of like hey, it's my favorite just because. I mean, I do think I really like 2. I really like 2. 3's just because of the 3D is kind of cheesy. 4 and 6 are probably objectively the best ones. Jason X is the most fun for me, and then I don't know. I think probably 8 is probably my least favorite. Like that.
Yeah.
That one's just. like, it's not even about Manhattan. It's about a boat. It doesn't make sense with the end. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Yeah, I love Freddy vs. Jason, and people do not like that movie, and I love that movie.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, oh my God, I'm not even going to get into how many times I saw that movie in theaters. And another one that came out on my birthday. That was my 21st birthday.
Yeah, you're just shit-faced in there.
Yeah, I mean, me and my friends had such a great time with that movie, and it's funny. Yeah, I feel like its reputation has kind of declined, or maybe it never had a good reputation. I don't know, but every time I go back to watch it, I feel like, this is going to be the time where it doesn't hold up. And you know what? Every time I watch that movie, I have a great time. I mean, I
Yeah.
was waiting for so long for that movie to come out, and yeah, it's not perfect, but like, what was a Freddy versus Jason movie ever really going to be? Like, it wasn't going to be some masterpiece.
No.
So yeah, I had so much fun with that movie. It was great just to see Robert Englund in the makeup again, and Freddy and Jason going at it. I mean, so yeah, to me, that's a good time.
Dude, I don't know if you remember, but back in the day, Eric and I, we always wanted Freddy vs. Jason so bad, and the internet was just kind of starting. And there was this trailer, and it was like some fan-made thing, but we thought it was real. And it was like Sweet Dreams by the Eurythmics was playing. And that was like throughout the entire thing. It was just showing all these clips of the other movies. And I was just like, oh my God. And it's like coming 2000, like Freddy vs. Jason. Do you remember that?
No, but it sounds
Oh,
fantastic.
dude, we're like, it's gonna happen. We're like little kids, like freaking out on this huge old computer. But
I remember going to horror conventions when I was like a teenager, and I met Kane Hodder a couple of times,
ooh.
and I, along with everybody else, would always be asking him, just hounding him about that. And he really kept interest in the series alive during those lean years, and it just sucks so bad that he didn't get to play him.
I know, and everybody, like Ronnie Yu is a director, and everybody's
Mhm.
like, "Oh, it's the producers that said I couldn't use him," and they're like, "No, it's the Ronnie said he didn't want him." So everybody's got something different to say too.
Nobody wants to take credit for that. And who would want to take credit for that? I wouldn't
I
want to
know.
be on Kane Hodder's bad side. So,
Yeah. Oh, really quick before we go,
Mhm.
honest thoughts about that smiley face in the tree.
It's funny. That seems to be like this controversial thing about this movie. Like, are you saying do I think it's too silly for this movie?
Yeah, I guess. I really like. Do you like it? Like, yeah.
I don't really have any strong feelings one way or the other. To me, it was most definitely just a carving in the tree that, the guy's face smashed into. And yeah, I don't really have strong feelings one way or the other, which means I guess I'm fine with it.
Yeah. I know it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't really bother me either, but I think that's probably up until this point the goofiest thing in the entire series I can think of.
I think the gravedigger moments in this movie are a little goofier. Like when he says, "Does he think I'm a fart head?" And then it cuts to the kid saying, "Yes." Like, I
Yeah.
think that is far goofier. But I don't know. I was watching some video on YouTube. Apparently, this smiley face is a bit contentious with Friday the 13th fans.
It's like we don't have anything else to bitch about besides that.
Exactly.
No, it's not that big of a deal, but that was the other thing. And like, even you saying, you're like, well, clearly it was like carved into the tree already. It's like, was it? Or what, like, was it supposed to be his face smashing into
Yeah.
the tree and making that?
Yeah,
Like, I
I
don't know.
feel like people are salty because they think that like this guy's face smashed into the tree and it created this smiley face, and
Yeah.
this moment like jumped the shark for Friday the 13th. And yeah, it's never really bothered me. I never really gave it too much thought.
It's like Looney Tunes almost. Like, it's something like that.
Yeah. I mean, look, again, I could see why maybe this movie is a bit too cute for some people, but for me, it's all good.
Yeah, I'm just imagining that one guy in the theater is probably like 26. He's like, I've been seeing these every year they come out. And he's like, all right, that's it.
Yep.
That's it. And just walks out.
He throws his popcorn down.
Yeah, just so fucking pissed. Well, anyways, Joe, as always, thank you so much for joining. So much knowledge, so much passion, Joe. So thank you, man.
Thank you, Alec. Always a pleasure. And we'll talk soon, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah, we've got you coming on for New Nightmare, so I'm sure we'll get that on Wheel of Horror very soon. And if you guys, listeners out there, haven't had a chance yet, we released our episode on Prom Night 2008 on Monday, so enjoy. And then on Monday, we have our episode on The Sixth Sense. So, good movie. Check it out. All right, guys. Thanks again, and thank you again, Joe.
Thank you.